Find the hospitality of Lot, Avram's nephew, was almost identical to his hospitality when it came to the angels. He saw them, he urged them to accept his hospitality. Originally, they said, we're going to sleep in the street. And he says, no, he urged them. They came into his home. And it says he was baking matzos. And then all of a sudden, the members of Stone realized he had guests. They wanted him to send out the guests, and they would sodomize them. And he went to the nth degree to protect his guests. It says when he hosted them, it says, the Torah says he had mishter umatzos. Let me find it. Pause. Parsha Yutes Gimel. V'yivtza b'maut. He urged him to a great degree. V'yasu elov. V'yasu elov. They came in a circuitous way, and they came to his house. V'yasle mishter umatzos avu v'yachelu. He made for them mishter, and he baked matzahs, and they ate. So if you take a look in the Seforno, the Seforno says, Mishter, Kviya Suda Vayayin. The central part of that meal was wine. He served him wine. Wine was considered a significant part of that meal. Because Lot had a certain desire for wine. Wine was considered valuable to him, important. As we see what happened, meaning they were in the cave and his daughters offered him wine. He became drunk, and ultimately he committed incest with his daughters. He says, Avol Avram lo osa mishte. When Avram hosted the angels, there's no mention of wine. It says he offered them he slaughtered calves for them, he gave them butter, milk. He said he offered them bread. He says, except when Yitzchak was weaned, he invited the leading members of the generation. Shoyu Murgoli Bekach Beisim Chosom. We told him this is a royalty, invited royalty to come. Royalty, when they celebrate, they're accustomed to have wine. Ka'om Ramzal, Kami Deshosi Chamra Chamra. But an ordinary person is not into wine. Only special people at special occasions. Avram did not offer wine during his hospitality. Lot did. And he says, as it's indicated later, that he had a weakness when it came to wine. And therefore, this characteristic of his, or this vulnerability of his, led to incest. Interesting. Points out the Mishnah is referring to wine, but Avram Avinu, there's no mention of wine. You know, when we read in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, I say siyog leTorah, we have to make fences. You never know where certain things could lead. You say, what's wrong with drinking? You know, you get high once in a while. The moment you allow yourself to create a semi-addiction to whiskey or to wine, there may be a moment where that will cause you to be vulnerable to cross lines that you had never crossed. That's what he's pointing out over here. Since he had a liking to wine, ultimately, it led to the incest. But if the person never drank wine, you don't drink wine. If that's the case, he would have never committed incest with his daughters. Just bringing out that point. Of course, he could have divulged that it was his wife, not his sister. So he did a gesture to save Avram's life. Therefore, he was saved from Sodom. I mean, factually speaking, the cat was out of the bag. It didn't help. When he said, Achosiyot, right? And as we said, what did Avram have to say? He said to Sari Menu, pose as my sister, because otherwise they're going to kill me. So we asked, Hashem had promised him he's going to have a child from Sarah. So if that's the case, he's guaranteed he's not going to be killed. So what is he worried about being killed? But nevertheless, he took the initiative to present her as the sister. So what he had said was, that's the whole concept of shtabus. That even though ultimately God will do what he will do, but we have to take every initiative to do within the human ability to save ourselves. If it's meant to be that you live, he'll save you, even though it's not your initiative that saved your life. We see Avram Avinu ultimately was found out it was his wife. So not divulging initially wouldn't have made a difference if Avram would have lived or died, because he wouldn't have died. But that Lot, his intention was to save Avram, because he didn't know that ultimately it would be revealed. For that alone, for that gesture, it was what? He was saved. We find something similar by Og. Og informed Avram Avinu that his nephew was taken captive. Although he had a sinister intent, he was hoping he would be killed. And as a result of that, he would take Sarah as his wife. But since ultimately he served Avram and he offered this accommodation to make him aware Lot was taken captive, regardless of his sin and intent, and his saving had nothing to do with what? Everything was miracle. Nevertheless, he's a credit. He lived hundreds of years till Moshe Rabbeinu. And the merit that he informed Avram that Lot was taken captive, regardless of his intent. She was going to have a child. She says, how's it possible? She said, Adoni's okay. Why was she skeptical? She said, my husband's so old. So Hashem, when he shared with Avram, he said, Adisokati. He shared with Avram that she said she was too old. Why? Because you go and you alter the truth for the sake of shalom bayis. So he didn't share with Avram exactly the fleeting thought that went through her mind. Shalom bayis. You never know, it can impair their relationship. And let me ask you a question. Avram believes his wife is the ultimate. And now Hashem points out, your wife has a shortcoming. Right? Maybe keep it under wraps. Hashem knows it. Let Hashem reprimand her. By sharing this with Avram, you don't know this could topple the apple cart. It'll put a damper on the relationship. But yet he shared it with Avram, your wife has a shortcoming. And Avram went to her and says, how do you speak this way? Is anything beyond God's ability? Right? Adoni's okay, that Hashem changed. He altered it. But this point that she was skeptical and she fell short of where she would have been, that he shared with Avram. Why? We find that the Medrash tells us, why does the Torah juxtapose the passing of Sarah to the Akedah? Because as a result of the Akedah, that was the cause of Sarah Imenu's death. That was the cause of her death. I mean, Yitzhak was the apple of Sarah's eye. Her whole life, she lived to have that special child. She finally had a child at the age of 90, and now her life takes on meaning. She's the matriarch, the mother of the future patriarch. Okay? She achieved her ultimate dream. She watches over him like a hawk. When she senses Yishmael's behavior is inappropriate, she goes to Avram Avinu, says, you must drive this maidservant and her son from the house, because I'm concerned that even that slight influence may interfere with him developing to be the patriarch. That's how she watched over him, and she valued this precious treasure which she had. And now all of a sudden she hears, and she's unaware of it, the Satan comes and says, do you know where your husband and Yitzhak are? He's bound on an altar, and he has a knife, and he's going to slaughter him. And she played out the rest of the scenario, and she believed that Avram slaughtered Yitzhak. It's too much for her to deal with. She passed away. She died from this. Avram comes back, and he finds out his wife passed away. His partner in Kiruv is no longer alive. And Avram Megayris Hanoshim, Sarah Megayris Hanoshim. It was his partner in everything he did. So his most valuable partner is no longer here. And why did she die? Because of the Akedah. Okay? So we've mentioned that the Rambam rules in Hilchos Tshuva that if a person's a Rasha all his life, and the last moment of his life he does Tshuva, they don't mention any of his failings, his spiritual shortcomings at the time that he's judged. Because since he did Tshuva, the record is cleansed, and therefore, when he passes away, he's not classified as a Rasha. On the other hand, the person's a tzaddik his whole life, and the last moment of his life, he makes a statement that he regrets that he ever did any mitzvah, and he wants nothing to do with it. They will not mention an iota of any of his spiritual accomplishments at the time of judgment. The whole record is this positive record, a whole lifetime is wiped out. So if that's the case, what happened? We read Avram went to the Akedah, Sodom tried to interfere, not allow him to go. Came as a raging river. Even at the end, when the Malach had said, withdraw your hand from the lad, and all of a sudden he sees Ayil, he sees a ram, and the ram is running towards him. The Torah tells us the ram was caught in the thicket. Why was caught in the thicket? So Rashi cites the Medrash. Of course, the ram, Avram wanted to actualize his intent in the ram, whatever he would have done to his son, and it was running towards Avram to bring this about, that this should actually be crystallized and concretized. And Son didn't want it to happen, because if it happens, that means till the end of time, whenever Son prosecutes the Jewish people, he's not going to be able to, he'll be silenced in the merit of the Akedah. So Son wanted to prevent this from happening. Sutton lost the game. He lost. Avram comes back, he's ecstatic. He achieves something, guaranteed the eternity of Jewish people, regardless of what degree they fail. We have the schus of the Akedah, which will silence the prosecution. Avram comes home. He finds out that because of the Akedah, his wife passes away. If Avram would have had an odor of regret of the Akedah, he says, Hashem, look what I've done. I was willing to sacrifice my son that was born to me at the age of 100. And I didn't question you, but so on and so forth. And after that, you take my partner in life. If he would have come with that claim, I regret that I did what I did, what would have been? The merit of that Akedah is wiped out. It no longer exists. And that was exactly what Sutton wanted to try to accomplish here. That he takes his wife because of the Akedah, to put him in a mindset that he should regret that he ever did the Akedah. Avram comes home, he finds that out, remains silent, doesn't say a word. He eulogizes her, he cries for her, he looks for a burial plot, not a word of what? Doesn't question Hashem. If that's the will of Hashem, it's the will of Hashem. As a result of that, the merit of the Akedah is intact until the end of time. But what Sutton tried to accomplish, he tried to annul it, to undermine it, putting Avram in a state that he should have regret that he actually was involved in the Akedah. Parsha Dorim, after we do that, Parsha Dorim before Shoshana, in front of the panel, and all the Nedorim and the oaths, everything is annulled, we make a disclaimer that if I should ever make an oath, a vow into the future, it should be null and void. I don't intend it should have any value. That's the disclaimer. It's called Modo. So Ramban says, when a person, God forbid, is on his deathbed, people sometimes speak out of their heads. They say things which are, you never know because of the pain they're suffering or what they're going through. You never know exactly what may come out of their mouths. A person could be a tzaddik his whole life and he could say things which are shocking. So therefore, when the person is still rational and still in control of himself, he should make a statement. If I should say anything which is inappropriate, I make a disclaimer. It has no value whatsoever. As a result of that, he's guaranteeing that his whole lifetime, whatever accomplishments were achieved, they remain intact. They should not be actually wiped out and annulled, as the Rambam says, the person regrets before he passes away. There's a question. We made a disclaimer last year after Hatar Dorim. Why do we need Hatar Dorim the following year? We made a disclaimer that any oath or vow that I should make in the future is null and void. So if that's the case, why go through this every single year? That's the question which is asked. The answer which is given by the Rishonim in the Dorim, what about at the time that you make the new vow, you still remember the disclaimer? And you disclaim the disclaimer. So that's an annulment of the disclaimer. If the disclaimer is annulled, then the vow and the oath and everything takes on value now. Therefore, since there's a concern when you made the vow, you may have remembered the disclaimer, and despite that you made the vow, that means you disclaimed the disclaimer has no value. So that means the oath in the vow takes on value. Now, therefore, every year we have to repeat the disclaimer for the vows that we don't think about, or we may make the vow, when we make the vow, we didn't think about the disclaimer, it wasn't in our mind, therefore the disclaimer is in place, therefore those vows and oaths have no value. That's the reason why we repeat it every year. On the chance that you remember the disclaimer when you made the vow, that would be annulment of the disclaimer. So a person who's in good standing, why should he want to wipe out his positive record? It's only if you reach a moment of, God forbid, of such excruciating pain, and because of that, he may say things which are out of turn. The Rashi, and it's based on the Gemara, a woman, after she gives birth, she brings a chatos. She brings a sin offering. Why does she have to bring a sin offering? So Rashi said, the Chazal said, because when a woman gives birth, she experiences such pain, she literally takes an oath that she will never, ever want to conceive again because of the pain that she's going through. So that chatos, the sin offering, is to atone for that kind of statement. Because in such pain, very often a woman makes that kind of statement. So for making such a statement, she needs kapora. Therefore, every woman that gives birth, she has to bring a chatos, a sin offering for that reason. So you never know, when a person's in excruciating pain, you may say things which you're not aware of what the person's capable of saying. Mark tells us, this is not Ernie's regular playing for Kedushin. Makis would be a different story. So Mark says in Kedushin, we say the declaration by the Bikurim, we make a declaration. Arami Ovidovi. The Aramean destroyed our forefather. That's referring to Lavan. But factually, you read the narrative, he never killed Abraham. He wanted to. He wanted to kill Yaakov for fleeing. And Hashem goes and tells him at night, just leave him alone. Don't in any way interfere with his life, positive or negative. But never says Arami Ovedovi. So from there, the Gemara says, what do we see from there? That when you have an evil thought, and the only reason why you didn't carry it out is only because it was not allowed for you to do it for whatever reason, the person is held culpable for that thought, because if not for what intervened, which didn't allow it, the person would have done it. Since Lavan would have done it, that was intentional, although it's clear he wouldn't have succeeded. But since his intention was to kill Yaakov, he's held accountable as if he killed Yaakov. Okay? So from there we say, Machshava Ra, evil thought, Hashem considers it as if it actually was actualized. So the Gemara says that's only by a goy.
Right.
By a Jew, it doesn't apply. Because what's the concept? And therefore, Rabbeinu Yonah says, let's say a person in a certain area of Yiddishkeit, he's very lax. Let's say he doesn't eat kosher. And he goes and he wants to go and buy something not kosher. Goes to the store, and he would have bought it, except it happens to be the non-kosher shop is closed. And he ends up buying the same thing kosher. He's held accountable for eating non-kosher. Why? Because the whole concept is that if not for what intervened, didn't allow to do it, he would have done it. So a Jew who normally does the right thing, he doesn't do these wrong things. He doesn't want to do the wrong thing. It's the circumstance way brings, and until he actually does it, he's not held accountable. The non-Jew, where his mindset and his whole perception or perspective is negative, so the only reason why he didn't do it is because what intervened. Therefore, he's held accountable and culpable, even though he never actualized it. That's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew. But an area where a Jew fails, and he's already in a position that he would have done it, if whatever happened wouldn't have intervened, he's held accountable even for the thought. Avram Avinu is Avram Avinu. He would have never. So until he would have actually verbalized, he had to verbalize it. The thought means nothing, but Avram never even had the thought. But even if you have the thought, chas v'shalom, if a person has certain questions in belief, right? Those surachri levavchem is minus, right? Minus, heresy is in the heart. You don't even have to verbalize it. There's an accountability. Avraham Avinu wasn't in any way deterred or impacted negatively. He just went about his business and continued going.
So Rabbi, a person who is going through a very difficult time,
Legislated that God forbid a tragedy happens to a Jew. The first words that come out of his mouth have to be Baruch Dayanemis. Those are the first words. That means the Jew says, I go on record, Hashem is the equitable judge. There's no iniquity in God's judgment. That's the first thing we'd say. Then afterwards, the person can say, but why, what, when? Okay, question it. But first and foremost, Baruch Dayanemis. Exactly for what we're talking about. Because God forbid, a person could say something initially which is totally inappropriate, which can actually topple the apple cart and affect the person very negatively. First thing a person says, God forbid, if a tragedy happens, even a financial tragedy. The Gemara says, a person has a ship with all his wealth, his cargo, and it goes down at sea. And now he has a financial reversal not to be believed. And he's paying by it. He says, Baruch Dayanemis. Even for that, it's not only, God forbid, for a life lost, even material loss, which impacts a person in a very negative way. A person says the bracha Dayanemis, b'shem Malchus. And the life of Sarah was Meir Shana, Esrim Shana, Sheba Shanim, Shnei Chayu Sarah. It was 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. I'm Torah could have said 127 years. But each unit is said separately. 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. And this was the life of Sarah. So the obvious question is, if she lived 127 years, evidently that was the life of Sarah, maybe. So what does the Parsha conclude? These are the years of Sarah. So there's a famous Rabbeinu Bachya, and I think remember the Balaturim says the same thing, that the numerical value of Vayiyu is what? Is 37. Sari Menu, she was barren most of her life. She went through very difficult times. Her husband was thrown into a kiln. She didn't know if he'd come out alive. She was taken by Paro when she was in Egypt. She was taken by Avimelech, the Philistine king. She went through plenty. You'd say after living that kind of life, you don't have much to write home about. But what was the essence of her life? By you. The 37 years that she spent with Yitzchak, that was the totality of her life. It was worth living because that was the ultimate in her, that she had the son Yitzchak, and she mentored him, she watched over him, she supervised him to make sure he should be who he was. That's by you. Do you want to know what the lifetime of Sarah was? She happened to live 127 years. But what was her life? If you want to quantify it, it was those 37 years. That's by you. That's Rabbeinu Bachya. And Rashi cites the famous Chazal. What are we stating her life in units? So he says, when she was 100 years old, she was no different than a 20-year-old regarding culpability of sin. There's certain sins that a person is not liable until you're fully sufficiently mature, which is the age of 20. At the age of 100, she was just as pure. When she was 20, her beauty was like a 7-year-old child beauty. So we had them unfortunately explain that up to the age of 7, a person develops regarding beauty. After 7, it doesn't continue, except the person matures, so that's why the person may look more beautiful. But the actual characteristics of beauty, the profile, what it's based upon is the involvement of the beauty, which normally stops at the age of 7. Sarah, she continued developing beauty until the age of 20. Chazal tell us, it's a medrash, that when the Egyptians, they saw Sarah's beauty, They never saw anything like it in their lives. She radiated beauty. And it says she was like, all women were kakov connected. They were like a monkey, compared a monkey to a human being. Regardless, whatever beauty was, that beauty paled Sari Menu's beauty. That was her beauty. The Gemara tells us in the Gila, it mentions the 4 most beautiful women in existence. And Sari Menu is mentioned as one of them. So Tosas asked, what about Chava? Chava was what? It says in Chazal that all women, the most beautiful women, again, were like a kof kenegdo. They were like a monkey compared to her. So Tosas says in Megillah, who was Chava? Chava was the handiwork of God. She wasn't born of a human birth. So it's understood, being that, we're speaking about somebody who's born of a natural birth, the most beautiful woman. But Chava being who she was, being the creation of Hashem, therefore she had one of a kind of beauty, not everything paled to that. So Sari Menu was one of those women that everybody's beauty paled to her. And that's why Paro was taken by this. You know, it's interesting. Avimelech, this was after Sari Menu regained her youth. She'd say she looked like a young woman. When Avram went to Egypt, Avram was a 65-year-old woman. That's what she was. And despite that, they never saw anything like it. So even at the age of 65, Sari Menu, it says, was all the women were kof connected. She was like a monkey. That at the time of Avimelech, when he took her, she already regained her youth. So it's understandable. He was attracted to such a level that almost like he couldn't control himself. Just pointing that out. Shnei Chayim Sora, Kulan Shalom L'Tova. All the days of her life were considered good. You hear this? What does that mean? She had tough times. You know, very often in life, when we experience something, we don't appreciate the value, especially if it's painful or it's worrisome at the time. After you live at the end of your life and you see, and you're able to connect dots, and you see how each piece falls in retrospect, you understand you're there where you are because, and those events were essential to where you are. Even the most negative takes on a positive connotation. I'll give you an example. The women in Egypt, it's a miracle happened. The only woman who was defiled by an Egyptian was Shlomis Bas Divri, and she brought it upon herself. It's unheard of. There's no question the Jewish women were beautiful. They were the chattels of the Egyptians. The men were tortured and beaten to death. And yet the women were not defiled by the Egyptians. How is this possible? It was a miracle. So Chazal tell us that in the merit of Sari Menu, when she was taken by the king of Egypt, which was the height of civilization, wasn't so simple. She could have succumbed, become the queen of the world. Yet when Paro approached her, what does it say? She told the angel to smite him, he got smitten. She wouldn't allow him to come near him. So because she protected and she was so concerned of her status and not allowed herself to be defiled, therefore, in the merit of that, no Jewish woman is going to be defiled in Egypt. So b'schus Sari Menu, in her merit, the Jews merited divine protection. So in retrospect, that event, it was traumatic, trauma. But what was the outgrowth of that? There's a klal Yisrael. Hashem goes and he attests to the fact, Hapalui, Hachanochi, that every one of the tribes, Hashem personally attests to their pedigree, that they're the offspring of their fathers. And they're not offspring of Egyptians. But that was the merit of Sari Menu. So Kul L'Tova. What about the kiln? When Avram was thrown to the kiln, it says initially, Sari Menu was crying, her husband's gone. Regardless, she's not going to have a husband. But what was the outgrowth? What was the outgrowth of coming out, going in and coming out? We merited unbelievable things. Avram Avinu established himself as the representation to be the one to counter all evil in existence. Atu Hashem Elokim Shemchat Ba'Avrom, V'otzeitzu B'ur Kazas Avraham. He became Avram. That dynamic was set because he came out of the kiln, because he went in and came out. And we merited endless, unlimited things in Klal Yisrael because of that kiln story. So in retrospect, when you look at all this, this was the ultimate. Now, there's a story, the Reichmans, Moshe Reichman, Paul Reichman, Zcharin Livrocha, when it came to, I'm not using the word philanthropy, tzedakah, he was in a league unto himself. There's a story. It's important to hear it, especially if you think you're a successful businessman, and what it means to say that you subjugate yourself to Das Torah. Rav Shach Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha wanted to speak to the Paul Reichman and his brother. So Rav Shach calls him, he wants to speak to him something very important. Immediately, they cancel all their appointments, they get on that private plane, they're going to Israel. Because Rav Shach asked they should come. Okay? There's the wealthiest Jewish family in the world. Rav Shach, the Gadol Hador says, come, they come. They arrive in Bnei Brak, and right before they arrived, there was a father whose son was a bar mitzvah, and he goes into Rav Shach and says to Rav Shach, my son is bar mitzvah. He really has no desire to learn. He's a good boy, he has no desire. Could you give him a bracha that he should have what we call a cheshik in learning, a desire to learn? So he should become a great Talmud Chacham. So Rav Shach says, not a problem. Rav Shach then was a man already, upper 80s, maybe 90s. He says, I'm going to sit and I'm going to study with your son for about a half an hour to give him a taste of what learning is. So Rav Shach is already an older man. He sits with this 13-year-old boy, and they take a Gemara and they study together for an hour and a half. And after he finishes studying with the boy, he says to him, so what do you say? Is it something very special learning? He says, I've never had this experience before. I'm dedicated, I'm committed to learn. And this is going to be the emphasis of the future of my life. That's what the young man says to Rav Shach. Okay? The Rachmans are waiting outside. They just came from Toronto to this meeting. Rav Shach is going to ask from them $80 million to build apartment houses for Avraham in Israel. Yeah? That's what he's going to ask. And they know that's going to be the discussion. And they come into Rav Shach. Rav Shach says, the way Rav Shach would speak in his way, he says, I can't see you. I just learned with a 13-year-old boy for an hour and a half. I'm worn out. You got to come back tomorrow. You got it? After you cancel your appointments, you fly in your private jet, you come to Israel, and then you tell them, I just expended my energy with this 13-year-old kid. Come back tomorrow. People say, you'd be offended. What am I, a nobody? Am I a zero? No problem. They came back tomorrow. They gave $80 million, $83 million the next day for the housing for Avraham. You understand? In retrospect, sorry, Menu, trauma, tragedies, this. She put everything in perspective. It was the ultimate. Every event, as much as it was traumatizing at the moment, we had different people because of those events. But you got to see it through that lens to be able to see Kulam the Tova.